Hello, everybody. Welcome to Where is the Line, where we explore the gray areas of life. My name is Jane, and I am with my wonderful co-host again, Sabrina. Sabrina, how are you doing?
Hi, Jane. I'm doing well. So excited to be back for another recording with you. Yeah, I feel like things are falling into place for me professionally. I'll share more when I have like officially made a decision. But yeah, things are good. Actually, I was going to tell you, you might appreciate this because you and I obviously we met over a cook. Well, we really bonded over a cooking session, right, back in
Mm-hmm.
Chicago when we made the German Asian fusion. Tomorrow, my friends here and I are going to do another one. So we'll do like a German Asian cookout. And
Nice.
I'm probably mispronouncing it. You might be better, but so I'm making the Spätzle, which is the German dish, and then my
Mm-hmm.
Chinese friend is making gochujang.
What is
Gochujang.
it? Now
Okay,
I'm
I don't. Okay, maybe it's his invention, but it's like a really spicy sauce, and so we're gonna mix it together.
okay. Well, you have to take a picture for me, and
I
I'm
will.
embarrassed that I don't even know what this is. Like, I'm embarrassed to be Chinese.
Yeah,
But take a
what's going
picture.
on here?
Take a
Yeah, let's take a
picture. Let me
picture.
know.
But
I'm glad you're doing your
kotsu?
classic.
Kotsu? Is that one? It's like a
Like
schnitzel?
katsu? Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Katsu.
Okay,
Okay.
that's definitely a thing. Okay, so we
Okay,
know
that
one
we're
thing at
also
least.
making. Yeah, so
All right, that's
Paige, friend of the
awesome.
show, is making the schnitzel, the katsu.
Okay, and are you guys doing this for fun? What or is this who's like who are we doing
Yep.
this for?
Yep, small circle. We only invited 10 people. And
Oh,
if they hate it, then we'll never share more broadly what this was all about. But yeah, excited. I'll let you know. I'll take some pictures tomorrow. But yeah,
okay.
that's sort of the weekend plan. How are you doing?
I'm good. Your idea really got me thinking. There's this TikTok trend a while back that I really want to do in Chicago, which is like get all your friends together and everybody bring a dish that starts with the letter of their name. So like I would have to bring an item or a meal or whatever that starts with J, and then you would invite your friends with different names. So hopefully everybody brings a unique dish. So
That's a
I
cool
don't know,
idea.
maybe I'll host it in the summer. Um, but yeah, I'm good. I'm in the office today on a Friday. We're recording on a Friday and we record, ahead of time, which our audience knows. But we're heading out to Montreal probably right after this recording. We're gonna go see the solar eclipse. And Montreal is gonna be on the like total eclipse line. So I don't know. I told a couple people and they told me that the people who have seen it came back a new person. Like they had an emotional response. People like cried when it happened. So I don't know. Like who knows? Maybe when it happens, like I will be a new woman. I will transform into my werewolf form. Like that's I feel like what happens. Um, so we'll
Wow,
see. I will report back. That'll be my like long weekend plan is Montreal.
fun. Oh my gosh, I'm so jealous. Take a lot of pictures. I've heard the best things about the city.
I'm very excited. There's a lot of really good food. And we're going as like a small little friend group. So it'll be good to see some friends that I haven't seen in a while. But
Have you
yeah, I'm
brushed up
very
on your
excited.
French?
Absolutely not. I would not speak one word. I am so embarrassed. Um, but I will be one of those like ignorant Americans,
Sure.
abroad.
Oh, so fun. Very cool.
I'm very excited. And I'm very excited for our conversation today. Today, we're talking about a topic that maybe some of us have already experienced, maybe some people are considering or going through now. And for people who may not have experienced it, this could be something that they may have to go through later, in life or in their career, which is a career pivot. And we're very excited to speak to a good friend and a colleague who's had a massive career transition in her life. She started her career as a US bobsledder, an Olympic hopeful who retired at the age of 29 and pivoted into the world of tech. Her name is Katie, and I will let Katie introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Katie Seeger. I'm a senior program manager at LinkedIn, based in Chicago suburbs. I have a 2.5-year-old son, a dog, and a husband.
Well, thank you, Katie, for being here today. We're very, very excited to hear a little bit more about your experience so far.
So excited. Yes. Katie, thank you for being on. I have so many questions about your history, but let's start from the very beginning. If you could help us and our audience understand how it all began, walk us through sort of how did you even get started in sports? Bobsledding, I mean, that is so cool. As a German, we have a big Olympic bobsledding team, and so I was always watching as a young child. I would never want to do it. It looked so scary. So so much respect for you. But yeah, how did you get started in sports? Like what even prompted that decision of going pro? And let's go from there.
Yeah, absolutely. And bobsled is huge in Germany. It's like their football. So definitely a lot of fun to compete in Germany. But yeah, I played volleyball growing up and many different sports. Just enjoyed being active and played college volleyball. And in bobsled, very different than most Olympic sports. They recruit college athletes just finishing up their sports. And so a lot of like football athletes, track and field athletes. Translate well into bobsled. And so very different where many other sports you have to start from the age that you can start walking when you think about gymnastics and ice skating and those type of Olympic sports. And so I received a Facebook message from a girl on the team who's recruiting new athletes into the sport following the Vancouver Olympics in 2010. And so decided to take that kind of leap of faith and take a combine, which is a physical test in Lake Placid, New York, and just kind of followed the process from there and ended up going on this wild adventure of being on the US bobsled team.
Wow. And so from when you were approached to when you actually started, how long is that process?
It took about, so I was student teaching at the time. So my degree's in actually elementary education. So I'm sure we'll talk about the pivot there. But degrees in elementary education, student teaching, received the message, went out, and I was like, at the very least, it would be cool to say that I went down a bobsled track once in my life. And so I would say like I received that message probably around February, like post Vancouver Olympics. And then uh, went out to Lake Placid in August to September to start the testing, and then kind of like team trial process and all of that flowed into the following winter.
Wow. So like a year-ish or so. That's crazy. And then how long were you in bobsled overall?
I competed for 6 years. So 3 years as a brakeman, which is the person in the back that pushes, and I spent 3 years as a driver. And so the two main positions in bobsled experience both, each for 3 years.
Wow. And then help because I'm seriously I have so many questions about just bobsledding in general, but like between the two positions, did you have any favorites? Like what are some of the help us understand like what are the different skill sets that you may need and what did you have a preference?
Yeah, I would say you can think of a brakeman as more of that like physical position. So they're responsible to get the sled off to the quickest start as possible before jumping in and I guess being along for the ride until they pull the brakes at the very end. The driver is more of a skilled position. And so um, navigating the sled using a pulley system, it's called the old D rings, and there's blades on the bottom of the sled that kind of guide the sled, the direction of the sled. And so very technical and challenging to learn. And I think I enjoyed that part was, yeah, constantly learning how to drive the sled quicker in short amount of time. And so I would say definitely being a driver is more challenging and more rewarding as well.
Yeah, I can imagine even just like milliseconds count, right? From that and like gaining any like optimization and technique will get you or further ahead. But that's so cool that you did like both. Um, Amazing. What a unique just story.
But yeah, I had a very successful bobsled career, a couple world championship medals. I was an alternate at the Sochi Olympics. And so traveling all around, like just a really incredible experience by taking that initial leap of faith. And when I knew it was time to step away from the sport, I wasn't 100% sure that I still wanted to be a teacher or to be in a classroom environment. So I was very much in a exploratory phase. I'll admit it here, but I did like a seasonal stint at Target, just like right when I retired, not sure what I wanted to do. And then eventually joined Make-A-Wish Foundation as a wish coordinator to help grant wishes for children with critical illnesses. And And so a lot of like project management ties there before, deciding to progress towards LinkedIn. So I think it was just the exploratory stage that really came after, and that self-reflection of, okay, I'm not the same person I was 6 years ago. What do I want to do now? And where do I belong in this next phase of life?
Yeah, no, that's going to be really critical for us, right? And for people that may think about that, like, what are some of the questions that you asked yourself in that process, right? You said you picked LinkedIn, but help us, like, what are some of the thought starters that you had on your mind? Like, what were things that were important to you? How did you navigate this decision making in exploring a career in tech?
Yeah, good question. I think for me, I'm always drawn to opportunities to grow and to learn new things. And so I had a family friend that worked at LinkedIn, and she raved about like the culture, and also very important to me is to be around like people that being a part of something bigger than myself with people that I enjoy spending time with, and I feel like add to my perspective. And so I think all of those elements combined, she raved about the culture and growth opportunities at LinkedIn. Again, not like like a common transition to move from bobsled athlete to Make-A-Wish coordinator to a program manager at LinkedIn. But LinkedIn actually has a program called the Unlock program, which aims to bring in diverse experiences to LinkedIn. So maybe on the resume, they don't have check all of the boxes of a standard candidate, but with a little bit extra ramp time, learning about the business, gaining skills. The idea is that all of that can be taught, but bring a diverse perspective to the work, which will be a value add to the culture of LinkedIn. So really unique, amazing program that's really focused on having the right skills versus the right background, experience, or degree. And so she mentioned this program to me, and just really felt, again, like drawn to those main values that I have in terms of being part of something bigger than myself, growing, opportunity to grow, and then being around great people.
Beautiful. And I love that LinkedIn has that program. I've heard of that program, and I think many companies should take a page out of that book, just because we preach the diversity of thought and all that, right? So hiring people from different backgrounds and that may not have the traditional sort of path. I love that. So if you now contrast your LinkedIn experience in tech with your bobsledding, what were some of the most rewarding parts of the bobsledding and the most frustrating as you look back at your career?
Yeah, I would say the most rewarding parts, again, like tied to my, I think, desire for growth. I think just being in that peak physical shape and like constantly testing my limits and reaching my potential, both physically, mentally, in all facets, really. And then I think very much tied to that is like the adrenaline, like the winning, the competing part of it, are all things that I got a lot of reward out of. I would also say the experience of traveling. So there's 4 tracks in North America, 2 in Canada, 2 in the US, in Park City and Lake Placid, and then the rest are in all over Europe and Asia. And so did a ton of traveling all winter, and saw many different like exclusive like ski type environments around the world. So it's just some beautiful, incredible places that I was able to visit. And then I think maybe just I think frustrating. I alluded to this when I spoke to like the driving position. I think it's such a hard skill to learn, and you have such a minimal amount of time to do it. And so you take 2 to 3 runs down the track a day, which equates to like 2 to 4 minutes, or sorry, yeah, 2 to 4 minutes a day of practice. And then we think about all the variables of learning, like you have different runners on the sled, the ice conditions are different, you enter a corner slightly differently. And so it's really, really challenging to perfect, and can be frustrating for someone who likes to like would practice all day long if they could, but really being limited to making that time count when you do go down the track. But yeah, it can be frustrating at times as you're learning that new skill. And lots of crashing too, which is never fun.
Oh,
That is so eye-opening because, to be honest, like when you said that you are only doing maybe 2 runs, both Sabrina, I just noticed like Sabrina and I both like shocked face. Just we have no idea on the back end or like the inner workings of how practice looks like and all that. And I feel like I personally really romanticize like athletes, like the idea of athletes and all you guys go through. Like obviously it's so challenging, but even when you said, like it just gave me goosebumps when you said that it's such like you're pushing yourself to your physical limit and your mental limit. Like it truly is like that. And it's not something I feel like most of us experience really on a day-to-day basis in like a 9 to 5, like more corporate environment. I'm sure we like learn and continue to grow. We experience that, but like just the fact that you were saying you guys were challenging yourself to your limits, I'm like, oh my gosh, goosebumps immediately.
Totally. And just, I think, because I played some semi-pro soccer in Germany, but I think like a sport like yours, I have so much respect because it's such high stakes and you have to be so focused for such a limited amount of time. I know I
Mhm.
wouldn't do well with that. So again, like I'm so impressed. Because yeah, in a soccer game, you have 90 minutes, right? You can have your down moments, but when you can have a down moment in those 2 minutes that you're going down there, right? So
Crazy.
Yeah, and being responsible for someone else as well, like their safety. If you think about you're the
Mhm.
driver and then you have the brakeman in the back. So very similar soccer. And then my volleyball background where like if I wanted to perfect my serve, for example, like I could do 100 reps. And if I
Right.
serve, it went out of bounds. If I missed a turn, I would crash the sled and potentially injure someone else. So to your point, like stakes
Crazy.
higher as well as just very limited time to and very inconsistent time to get it right.
So I feel like even though many people think about career pivots, right? But yours, I think, was just incredibly unique and bigger than the normal, right? Like going from maybe a business intelligence role into UX research, that's like easier done. But for yourself, like that was a massive decision to pivot. So can you walk us through your emotional state? Like some of the, I'm sure you were nervous. Well, I don't want to assume. So share with us more sort of your feelings and emotions that went through your head and making this decision to pivot.
Yeah, I would say so like decision to step away from bobsled came in 2017. Think about the year. 2017, I actually, my training partner suddenly passed away. So it was a super hard time in my life. And I think I just kept kind of like plugging away. It was leading up to the Pyeongchang Olympics in 2018. And so I was managing that grief and it really manifested itself physically. I ended up tearing my hamstring leading into the Olympic trials into 2018. And since Olympic sports are kind of like on 4 year cycles and non-Olympic years, there's world championships, but I had just fallen short in 2014 and just in that self-reflection going in 2018, I knew that I didn't want to do this for another 4 years and just felt ready to move on to that next phase of life. I also want to start a family, which I feel like women like need to think about that more. And I just felt right in a lot of different ways. As well as I just needed to focus on myself and the grieving process there. And so stepping away while it was really hard, I had a ton of support for my family and just like faith that it was time to move on and excitement for the future. And so, as I mentioned, like it was definitely like a long exploratory phase where I wasn't sure exactly what I wanted to do next, but just kind of followed the next step as it was shared with me. So, like, I think just having the right people in place and network in place to help guide that process and sticking true to like my values, what was most important helped me to like feel more confident as I was determining and like kind of listening to and having patience with, I guess, too, what should come next. And so
Mhm.
I think an array of emotions to answer your question went through that. And then when I committed and got into the Unlock program at LinkedIn, um, it was exciting to like start something fresh, something new. And I think having that added support of the Unlock program to almost like kind of go back to school for a couple months and learn about the industry, learn about the skills, learn about tech and the business. It felt good to like learn something new and to be in a different environment. So I would say it was mostly excitement, probably some nervousness attached to that, but I had confidence that it was time to move on to the next thing.
Yeah. It's I feel like there's always a sign, right? Like sometimes we really struggle with something and we're kind of stuck. We feel stuck. We're frustrated in the situation, but then sometimes like eventually there will be a sign. And like in your situation, it's like a physical sign of like, this is it for me. This is not for me anymore. I need to move on to the next thing. And so um we are very grateful that you made the transition now here to tech. So we got to meet you. But um, as you know, the podcast tries to explore different sides of things, right? Like obviously this is a happy, successful story, but we also want to hear like where the transition was easy versus difficult for you, just so like for other folks who may be exploring career transitions, for them to fully understand like not just the rosy and the positive and exciting part of this transition, but also how it can be difficult and how there could be a change curve. So maybe let's start with kind of the easier side of the transition, whether it's going from sports to Make-A-Wish or Make-A-Wish now to a tech company. What were some of the skills that you felt like were easily transferable? Obviously, a lot of like bobsledding is the physical component that we don't really experience now is a very much a mental thing. So what are some of the things that you felt like made the transition easier for you?
Yeah, I would say like I think as an athlete, there's a lot of transferable skills that you develop into the business world. I think for me, like some that come to mind is that growth mindset. Like in bobsled, you're looking for hundredths of seconds and to improve. So you're like looking for constant improvement, knowing that you can find it somewhere. And so I think having that growth mindset has been huge, especially like making that career pivot and knowing that if I don't know something, I can learn it. And believing that. I think very closely tied to that is adaptability, like the conditions, being able to like recover and focus on what's on your scope of control and adapt when things change. And we all know like tech things change very frequently. And so being like assessing challenges and then being able to move forward quickly, I think is another skill that has served me well, along with being very like process focused, managing time, and progressing towards a goal. So I think those are some like foundational elements that have really helped me in the transition.
Yeah. It's very insightful because I feel like a lot of it is just soft skills, which I feel this applies to any type of job and any type of transition. A lot of it, like you mentioned, growth mindset, like that is valued at any company, any type of career. So I think that that makes a lot of sense. What about like the difficult side? You mentioned your degree was also more like along the lines of teaching and education, also like pretty different from tech. Were there situations where you felt like there were skill gaps? Did you have to go back to school or relearn certain things? What was your experience there?
Yeah, I mean, I would say like I definitely in my initial starting role at LinkedIn definitely had like a lot of imposter syndrome, just like not 100% feeling like I belonged, and not by any means like if anyone treated me differently or made me
Mhm.
feel like I didn't belong, but it was more of an internal like I don't have the right skills or background for this. And so I think that was a big struggle in the early days that I've been able to like build skills around. And then I would also say, uh, like the constant changing and like learning of products, like learning of business. Like I hadn't had that background. And so again, like I believed I could learn it, but in the early days it was hard. And a lot, it was a pretty steep learning curve
Mhm.
to gain all of that. And then I think the communication piece has been like a big learning in that, like how to speak differently to different audiences and different levels, and not something that I'd had to practice in my previous world. And so I think those are a few that stand out to me that were like took the longest to learn or for me to overcome as I made the transition.
Yeah. Can I ask just a little further too? I would love to learn a little bit more. As you were working in more of the bobsled world, obviously you're very close with the partner that you would like do your bobsled with, but I would assume there are also other roles that you would interact with, whether it's a coach or like, right, or even like physical therapy. And I would assume different types of roles. Um, is that any different than some of the experience that you have now in a more corporate experience where you're working with like cross-functional teams, but then maybe you have a core working team? Like, do you feel like that was similar or even that dynamic is different, the people that you work with?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I never really transparently like thought about it in that way, but I guess like in the sports world, you do have a lot of cross-functional partners that help you to achieve your goals. Um, but I would say it's just a lot less like formal, right? So like it's
Mm,
not like I'm bringing forward a recommendation or understanding how to like change my communication style based on who I'm speaking to, whether to make it more up-leveled or to more make it more detailed. And so I think it was just more of like a constant. Uh, but I do think there was probably some element that I was able to take with me in terms of just like learning the different people and their styles of
mhm.
partnering together and working together towards a goal. So I think there are some parallels there, which yeah, I didn't maybe recognize until you said it.
But I think, I mean, listening at least from your experience, I think it's what we had anticipated to come into this conversation is that, employers really value soft skills because a lot of times that's like the harder thing to learn. Whereas, you mentioned imposter syndrome, but it's all like technical skills. It's like knowing the product, knowing the inner workings of that particular company. And that's something people can learn, like through practice, through learning from like peers. Whereas I feel like soft skills, so things like, your motivation to learn, your growth mindset, and just like adaptability and flexibility, a lot of that is not as easy to learn, and it's not something you can necessarily really take a class on. Like you could, but it's harder to develop. So I
Mhm.
think, I mean, what you shared is like really resonates because I think a lot of employers in general are looking more for soft skill rather than like a very technical skill about that particular company.
Yeah, I think that's a really important takeaway in that, to your points, like the communication aspect, right? And like that sort of softer skill side of stakeholder management, relationship building,
Mhm.
communication, those hold true in everything, right? And the more, no matter where you come from, but the more you can grow and nurture those skills, it will set you up for the next pivot, whether you're like Katie moving from athlete into the corporate world, or I talk to a lot of ex-military, right, who have a hard time translating their skills. And I mean, they are some of the best communicators in war zones, but oftentimes they don't feel like they have the right communication in the corporate world. But I think there's a lot of great takeaways for our audience that the more you can practice communication, tailoring messaging to different audiences, it's just going to be key. So thank you for sharing, Katie. And so I know you shared already a little bit with us about your decision making and why you chose tech, and you had that family friend at LinkedIn, and I again love that LinkedIn has this unlock program. But for our listeners, do you have any other tips for them as they explore? Like maybe they don't have the luxury of finding a job at LinkedIn, but how do you have any other advice on what resources they should go to make a decision on what industry to break into? Any other tips there?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, very similar. I think it goes back to like leveraging your network and understanding where there are those parallels to what you're doing now to potentially other industries or other roles. And so I think being open to exploring, leveraging your network, and then as I shared, like I really leaned on my values as like helping me to make those decisions and what was important to me personally and what I wanted to find in my daily work. And so I think being really clear on what's most important to you as you're making that assessment and looking for new opportunities is critical to finding something not only maybe that's different or of interest to you, but something that you'll enjoy longer term.
Yeah, I think the values piece is so critical. So I love that you highlight
Mhm.
that. It's a good reminder for everyone to understand what are your own values, but how does that align with the jobs, right, and the job opportunities. And to play devil's advocate a little bit in your journey at LinkedIn, and as you continue to explore tech world, was there ever a moment where you kind of thought maybe the grass is greener elsewhere, or like where you maybe doubted your decision?
Um, I think I wouldn't say I doubted it. I think I said, like I mentioned, with like imposter syndrome a bit. And I think it's easy to always fall back. Like when I initially retired from sport, I immediately looked into like, okay, how do I renew my teaching certificate? So I think it's really easy to fall back on what is my degree in,
Mm.
where does my experience lie versus like truly being open to other opportunities and to making a pivot. And so I think that was like a barrier that I had to overcome in the beginning. And I think something that helped me as I was like going through Make-A-Wish Foundation, my Target days. I think looking back on previous experiences when I, for example, took that initial risk to go out to Lake Placid to give bobsled a try, I think knowing that you can take a risk and it doesn't mean that you have to do it for the rest of your life. Like it's okay to try different
Mhm.
things. And I have seen like evidence in my life of where those risks have been rewarded. And so I think that was something that also helped me as I was, exploring different careers, like recognizing that this isn't a permanent decision. It's this decision right now, and then I can see where that leads me and what other doors that opens up. And so I think having that mindset was super helpful for not having that kind of like regret or looking from side to side as I explored different careers.
Were there other careers that were closer to like the world of sports that you may have explored? I feel like this obviously is a major pivot, but like, did you think about things like maybe coaching or like stuff like that where it might be tangential or like adjacent to the world of sports?
It's a good question. I didn't like I had done some volleyball coaching. I always thought of it as more of like a additive versus something
Mhm.
I would want to do full time. I think it mentioned like I wanted to start a family. A lot of like full-time sports jobs requires you to like be on the road a lot and
Mhm.
have a lot of weekend commitments and off hours. And it just wasn't something that I felt like I wanted to commit to full time. So I think, again, taking that like personal evaluation of what's important to me, I just felt like it wasn't uh, the right fit
Yeah.
for what I valued and where I wanted to go.
Yeah, that makes sense. Um, all right. Well, now that you're in a like kind of new world, as you were going through this transition, and I'll use myself as an example, and I know plenty of people feel this way oftentimes about a career pivot, um, is that sometimes you have to take a step back. And that could manifest in a bunch of different ways. It could be a pay cut, it could be a title change or reduction in title. Right? It could be feeling that imposter syndrome, feeling really uncomfortable and having to take a step back from a role where you're very comfortable or maybe even outperforming, right? As you navigated your career change, you mentioned imposter syndrome. I would love to just like dig a little bit deeper. Was were there other things that you were considering that maybe made you nervous about this transition, whether that be pay or whatever it may be? Or it doesn't even have to be the transition between sports and more corporate, but even within the corporate world, did you experience any of that?
Yeah, I would say like it's definitely hard to have that feeling of like starting over and like
Mhm.
having to take on that beginner's mindset. And so I think that's a personal challenge that for sure it's hard to overcome. And I definitely experienced that in the transition. In terms of pay cut, I will say definite no. So the US, I mean, probably different than other career pivots, but most people don't know the US is not funded by the government. Sorry, Olympic sports were not funded by the government. And so while I was competing, received like a small stipend, my cost of living through living at the Olympic Training Center. But majority of athletes are like working on side jobs and like waitressing jobs to pay for their sport. And so during that time period, I was really like my living was covered, but I was not saving. And so I would say like in that regard, tech was like a big paycheck upgrade.
Mhm.
But yeah, I think it's like being okay with going back to being a beginner at that time in your life when you're 29 uh is takes a little bit of like courage.
Yeah. I mean, even for your transition, right? Like you were at the top of like some of the best athletes essentially get to go compete in the world championship and even the Olympics. And so you were really at the top of your game, right? And you even mentioned even like internally, you felt like you were at your peak for like physical performance and like mental ability. Like it were just the best of times in a way. and then coming to a completely different world, maybe taking a somewhat junior like title just to like start your career all over again in a completely new area, feeling the imposter syndrome, feeling uncomfortable like in your job is like that is really scary, I think. And like I've had many situations where I was scared to take a leap of faith because of this fear of feeling that way or feeling like I may not be able to like get through that learning curve. Or it could be like pay cuts, title cuts often can deter people away from an opportunity as well.
Yeah, I think it just takes a lot of trust in the process. Like I don't know, for in different stages of life, you've been a beginner in many, maybe not just career, but you've learned something new throughout your life and have kind of restarted. And so I think it's just the security in knowing that that process is cyclical and you start somewhere, but you'll continue to grow from it. And so I think, yeah, it takes a lot of trust, a lot of blind faith in the leap that you take if you decide to make a transition. A lot
Mm.
harder as an adult than it was as a kid, for sure. Yeah.
No, but like trusting the process, we actually, this is a theme we've been talking about a lot on our podcast, not being too set on sort of the outcome or what other people think, right? Oh, what do they think of me if I start from the beginning, right? What might society, my family think and all of that. So I think it really speaks to you and your character and, being humble and knowing that this will fulfill you and you will succeed and all that. And we'll talk about identity later on because I think that's a really big question, especially in those pivots. But before that, so obviously in bobsledding, the idea of success was probably clearly defined, right? Especially in Olympics, and you want to be the best, right? But so how was that process for you, Katie, in going into the tech world? You spoke about values, but how did you define success for yourself as you started in at LinkedIn and in the corporate world? Like what were some of those rewarding parts, but like how did you really define success for you?
Yeah, and I think honestly, that was a really hard part because I think to your point in sports, if you win or lose, and kind of like the focus on competing well. And I think for me, I drew a lot of meaning from the same type of input. So I think continuing to be team focused. And then finding energy from accomplishments, like when I launch a big project or see others succeed on my team. I think finding energy in that like accomplishment of a checking a box too has been rewarding. And I also think to the point like LinkedIn's a very mission driven company. And so continuing to like find meaning through work and through living out the mission of LinkedIn. So very similar to like finding meaning in the enjoyment of the process and the end goal that I found in bobsled. But it's definitely like a lot grayer of a definition of success than it was competing as an athlete.
Mm. But yeah, it's so cool, like how we speak about the team aspect, right? And how that fulfills you. That I feel like really translates from the bobsledding into LinkedIn, and that's beautiful. And so it sounds like you, from a and like on the flip side, right? We want to highlight both sides, and you touched on it a little bit. But is there anything else that you found incredibly frustrating in your journey of sort of repositioning yourself in this corporate world? Besides, we heard you talk about obviously imposter syndrome, but were there other things that you really like missed bobsledding, maybe, or like the athlete world that the corporate world couldn't give you?
Yeah, I definitely definitely miss competing, like and that adrenaline that comes with that. And so that's something that's hard to find in the day-to-day of the corporate world, that high stakes competing and that environment. But I would say like another area that I struggled with in the beginning as well was having a hard time setting boundaries. Like I used to train all the time and really like put, being an athlete was like a 24/7. You're thinking about how you're sleeping, you're thinking about what you're putting into your body. And so it's constantly on. Whereas when I moved into the corporate world, I had a really hard time of setting those boundaries. So like I would want to work longer than I should and to always be available when I was customer facing. And so I've definitely grown a lot in that area. And I think fueled too by being more of like an internal role versus customer facing. But I really had a hard time in transitioning that part of it, and knowing that, I couldn't always be all on in this new world.
Yeah. I also just want to like add some additional context for our audience here. Like we obviously want to touch on both the positive and the negative side of this experience, but like earlier Katie mentioned, she experienced imposter syndrome. She went through all of this like learning curve and learning the new product, learning a company, but she is probably one of the like most top performing person now, at least on the team. I work on Katie's like broader team, and she like leads some of the biggest projects that we see within our big broader organization. Like she is killing it. And I feel like this is evidence for hopefully our audience that like yes, this transition will be difficult and that there will be learning curves, and it's not going to be easy, and you are going to experience whether it's emotional or whatever, like different types of emotions going through it. But as long as you have like the willingness to learn and the willingness to grow, because I think ultimately a lot of it boils down to the willingness to grow and to learn in this new experience, like you could kill it as much as somebody who like was at the top of her game in a completely different industry and now moving into a new industry. She's doing just as well. And so I think this is just, again, like an example or hopefully evidence that people can take with them as they explore something like this. So I just had to like quickly, I just have to put that out there because we keep talking about how like, oh, she went through this new journey, but I'm like, no, she's killing it now. So we're way past that part of that journey. But
Oh, thanks, Jane.
anyways, um,
So inspiring. Thanks. Thank you.
yes. Um, Sabrina alluded to this earlier, which is like your identity. Obviously, and you mentioned this too, right? Like your life was this sport. It bled into your personal life, whether that's like your sleep schedule, the way you eat, the way you like live your life, essentially. Um, we're curious, how did that identity change over time as you move into a more corporate or maybe like work and life is somewhat separate type of world? And then also beyond that, what about like social family expectations, right? Like that was your identity, even in your social circle or family circle. How did that change over time?
Yeah, it's a very real problem, and many athletes struggle to find their identity outside of sports and when they decide to make that transition. I felt super lucky because I had such a strong support system in place. And so it felt like my identity was not rooted in being an athlete. It was in being Katie and having faith and being, in my family and friends and group of people that I knew were going to rally around me to help me through that transition. And I truly was able to do that successfully because of I think that transition was great because of their support and really not having expectation for me to continue and wanting to support me through that journey. It was, so meaningful. And so, yeah, I could not have done it without my support system. And it's not an easy journey. I think transition in anyone's life is always uncomfortable and brings with it a lot of different emotion and discomfort. But I truly do think it's important to, focus on anchoring on what matters to you, who matters to you
Mhm.
most, versus finding the identity in things that will be fleeting and will end eventually.
Oh my gosh, that's so deep.
Mic drop.
No, seriously. Well, Katie, thank you so much for your time. We're starting to come to kind of the end of our podcast, but for our audience who and honestly it kind of varies. Like we don't know where our audience is in their career journey. Maybe some people are considering, maybe some people have never experienced this. What would you say or what would you recommend to people who maybe have opportunities but are too nervous to kind of take that next step, or have a fear of, you know, trying a new opportunity, but then the grass may not always be greener? What would you recommend to that audience group?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, listen to your gut at the end of the day. So I like shared a lot of tools along the way that I used. It may work for others, it may not in terms of, tying your decisions to your values and leaning on your network. But I think at the end of the day, it's really important of like how all those things come together to truly supply that gut feeling on, um, not letting fear get in the way of that deep down feeling of what you feel like is right for you. And again, like recognizing that it's not a permanent decision. If you decide to make a change and it's not right for you, there's always an opportunity to make another pivot. And so I think that's what life's all about, is exploring as much as you can and getting the most out of it and building relationships with great people along the way. And so I think as long as you're able to do that successfully, then any move you make is going to be great.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Katie. This has been really inspiring. Also for me personally, I'm just sort of somehow you took away my fear of potentially maybe trying something new. Because to your point, nothing is permanent. I love that. Like I feel like sometimes some of these decisions are massive and you then just give up because you don't even want to try it because it seems so big and it seems like
Mhm.
you're signing yourself up for something forever. But that's not even true, right? And life is about exploring, like you said, and listening to your gut. So really appreciate all of your advice and sharing your story. So cool. So before we let you go, plug city, plug away any projects you're working on, anything that you want to share with our listeners, and also where can they find you if they maybe have some additional questions for you.
Amazing. Great. I'd say the biggest project that we're working on, we're expecting another baby boy in June. So my husband and I are very excited about that. And then my niece has Down syndrome. And so my family has always rallied around that cause for awareness and supporting education and resources. And so Gigi's Playhouse is a non-for-profit, very near and dear to my heart. So, and then in terms of if you have additional questions or exploring a career pivot and want to connect, go ahead and connect with me on LinkedIn, Katie Seeger.
Perfect. Yeah, we'll put all of that in the show notes and congrats on growing your family. So exciting.
Yeah.
And yeah, so dear listeners, if this inspired you, it resonates, if you have any additional thoughts, if you may be exploring a career pivot or you're maybe have some questions about that, we want to hear from you at whereisthelionpod@gmail.com. And please subscribe, rate, review, wherever you listen to your podcast. We are on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcast actually going away, FYI. So we'll be on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. And thank you for listening. Bye bye.
Thanks for having
Bye.
me.